everyone. Welcome back to weeks 4 and 5 of our Snowed In Sampler Sew Along. This week we are going to be working on block 4, but this video will also work for block 5, which is next week because we have the same base block. So for both weeks you can just refer to this one video. So I've gone ahead and I've cut out my block. So let me give you the page number of that. We're on page 5 of our instruction. And I've got my rectangle cut out for my present. I've got my 2 ribbon pieces cut out. I've got the 2 pieces that will become the bow, and there's a couple of background pieces. So that's all very easy to cut, so I'm not going to go over how I cut out each rectangle, but I do want to go over how you do the cutting for the present block here. So I'm going to tilt it up on my mat like so. And this is step 1 in the cutting instructions. What we're going to do is we're going to cut this corner off at a 45-degree angle. And you can take a clear acrylic ruler that's got a 45-degree angle marking, and you're going to line the 45-degree angle line up with that short end of your rectangle. Then what you're going to do is you're going to slide it until the tip is even with the tip or the corner of the square. So I'm going to set it down and make that cut, and then I'm going to step up to the camera so that you can see that a little bit better. So let me come around here a second. I'm doing this by myself, can you tell? So there's my piece, and what I can do is pull this over and you can see that my cut went right into the corner there, and that made my 45-degree angle like that. So not hard to do. We're going to do that same thing on the opposite corner, so you can set that aside and just rotate your piece. And again, you can cut that at the 45-degree angle. And I'll show you a second way. If you don't have a ruler that's got the 45-degree angle marking here, you can also take this distance, which is 6.5 inches from top to bottom, and then you could measure over this direction 6.5 inches and mark, and then you can cut from that little point to this bottom corner, and that will create your 45-degree angle line as well. So whatever you feel more comfortable doing, either way will work. What you're going to end up with in the end is a piece that looks like this, cut out of the middle, and a triangle on either side. Let's see, there you go, now you can see a little bit better. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to take these 2 triangles, and again I'll set my mat up at an angle here so you can see. So there's your triangle right there. You're going to measure along the long side. As you can see, there are 2 short sides and 1 long side. We're going to measure along the long side. You're going to measure 3/4 of an inch over from this cut edge right here, and you're going to trim that off like that. A little bit hard to do at that angle, but there you go. Those are your 2 pieces, and you're going to discard this one, and then you're going to do the same on the other triangle. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to piece in that red piece right here. Okay, so then let's talk a little bit about the piecing instructions for this step. We are going to be adding a red ribbon along these 2 long sides. Now it's really easy to get confused and add it to the 2 short sides, but then your red piece is going to be way too long. Do you see how big that overhang is there? So just be conscious of that when you're placing this red strip, that it needs to go along this long side here. And you're just going to center it on there, so you kind of have an equal overhang. You're going to put them right sides together, and you're going to sew along there. Now, because this edge is bias, I have a little tip to share with you that'll make it easier when working with the bias. Now, if you remember, these edges were all straight of grain, so when we cut that at a 45-degree angle, that made this bias, and that means it's going to be very stretchy. So that means you have to handle it with care so that your block doesn't get distorted. And the easiest way to do this is to take the straight of grain piece and have it to the top when you sew, so the bias is to the bottom. So bias always goes to the bottom is how I remember that. So if you're sitting at your machine, your piece is going to be red skinny rectangle up, bias on the bottom side, and as you sew, this is going to stabilize that, and the bottom bias will not stretch out. If you did it the opposite direction and sewed with the bias to the top, your feed dogs and your foot is going to push this forward along the top, and that's going to stretch out that bias angle. So that's why we keep the bias to the bottom. So you're going to go ahead and sew that to that, and you can do the same on the opposite side. And I'm going to show you a couple little clips here of that being done, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the trimming. Okay, so I showed you the two clips of how that looks sewn together and now how it looks pressed. Now we're going to go ahead and trim these edges. So that's the second and third diagram on step 2. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your ruler and lay it along this straight edge. And the first cut is very simple to make. And actually in the diagram I don't have both of them sewn on at the same time just for simplicity, but here I do. You can do it either way. But we're just going to go ahead and trim across here. And then we are going to turn this into a 90-degree corner coming off the point of the black triangle. So let me just make that trim and then bring it up to the camera so you can see. So there's my cut that I made. And what you want is this seam line to come directly down into the point. So let me come a little closer. Let's see if we can get the camera to focus on it so you can see right there how that looks. Then we are going to do the same on the opposite corner. So that you get a nice 90-degree corner with the line of the seam going perfectly into the 90-degree corner, and we can also trim this up here. So you end up with a block that looks like that. And that trimming is important so that those pieces end up perfectly in the corner. Then we're going to take the little triangles that we cut earlier and we're going to sew those on. So you're going to lay them right sides together, like so. But in this case, the black edge is now our bias, and the red again is still our straight of grain, so we can flip it over and sew with the straight of grain to the top and the black bias to the bottom. So go ahead and sew from there to there, and I'll be back to show that step. Okay, so I wanted to give you a little close-up detail of getting this piece on here correctly. And as I laid this out, I remember that I forgot to mention the pressing on this previous step. Now in the pattern it shows that you press towards the red ribbon, which you can do. On this one I did press it open just because I felt like I didn't lose as much in my seam. So either way will work, but I did get it to lay nice and flat and true to size by pressing that open. So you can choose which way you want to do that, either towards the red or open. Then let's go back and let's talk about how this gets centered on here. So let me see if I can bring this to the camera so that you can see. So do you see, there we go, how my seam line is right in the little tip of that valley. So the sewing of the 1/4 inch seam right here comes right off where those, let me see if I can hold it like that, where these two pieces come down, that's the bottom of the valley right there, that's where my seam line comes out. So all of those things have to align perfectly on both of them. Let's see, there's the bottom one too, so that you get your nice straight seam after you sew and open this up. So I have one that's already pressed because this works with many different angles, but what I'm talking about is where this seam ends up nice and straight here. So again, there's a picture of, let me move it so the camera can focus, where your seam line comes out in the valley. I have a sample also that shows you if you have done it wrong, what it's going to look like. So let me see if I can get it a little closer. Because it's already been pressed, it's hard to get it to lay flat. But I think you can see how that the 1/4 inch seam allowance is not lined up in the bottom of the valley where those 2 points come down. And then what happens when you open it up is you get a little bit of a jog happening along this edge. It's not a straight a nice straight edge here or here like it was on this piece. So that all happens with the placement of the valley in correlation to where your seam allowance is. So now if that feels just a little bit complicated to you, there is kind of a workaround to it. And if you have the folded corner clipper ruler, this is one that I'm going to be talking about when we do folded corners in one of the future steps. So if you happen to have that, you can also just lay it down on that black triangle and trim that little piece off. And you would do this before you've sewed it, but I'm just going to show you how once that's trimmed, do you see how that is perfectly aligned? So you don't even have a valley to deal with. As long as you just line up those two pieces, it automatically makes a nice straight edge. So if you are wanting to avoid that valley, then you're going to want to have a ruler or something like this where you can trim those little corners off. And the same would apply here. Let's see, I gotta flip it over one more. And again, you would have done that before you sewed, but you could, I mean, the same technique applies where if you trim both those ends off, you don't have to deal with your valley. So you can choose which way you want to do that. Okay, I've gone ahead and pressed this block here, and I've also proofed it. It should be 6.5 by 12.5 inches, and I used this 8 by 14 inch ruler to be able to get that to the right size, or double check that it is the right size. Then you're going to go ahead and make some of these half square triangle blocks. And I'm not going to go over the instructions for that because we did it in week 3 when we made block 2. So if you need to refer back to that, you can. Otherwise, you can go ahead and sew these pieces together into a row, and then that will attach on to here right there. Now, I misspoke earlier in my video, and I hope you'll forgive me that I didn't go ahead and reshoot everything, but this is supposed to be both of these blocks here for week 5. So we're making blocks 4 and 5 here in week 5 of the sew along. So the only thing you do differently to make this one is you're going to turn it on its side, but otherwise it is the exact same block. Then you're going to take a little bit larger background piece here and sew it to your 2 half square triangles, and then this will fit along there. So you're going to make 3 like this and 2 like this. Now for this particular block, you're going to take 3 of your present blocks and a background square that's cut 6.5, and you're going to sew that to the side of the block, and you're going to make 2 that look like this and 1 that looks like this. So there's 3 blocks there and 2 blocks like this, and that wraps up week 5 of the sew along. So coming up in week 6, we are going to make just 2 of this really easy block, and then we'll have a little catch-up time. So if you're behind on anything, you can use that time to catch up on that as well. So thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed making these fun blocks. It's a little bit different technique. Gives you some good practice at working with bias angles and learning how to do the valley technique, or learning how to avoid the valley technique. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out either in the comments here on the video or via email. My email address is heather@ankastreasures.com. Thanks again for joining us.